Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dr. Elizabeth and Rick Chrisman ping pong dialogue on a wonderful book, which by now I know some of you have already bought, called The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. And we're on a chapter called The Same Sky, chapter 8. And every one of these chapters has been just a treasure of information and also a fresh and very positive perspective. So listen, Elizabeth, the first question always is, what does the title mean, The Same Sky?
This follows on the chapter Living Apart, which was about segregation, particularly in schools and in housing. And she pivots to, you can't keep things from crossing the barriers that are segregated. And she's talking particularly in this chapter about economic justice and how, everybody makes, trash, but the trash depositories are in Black or brown neighborhoods. And then she talks a great deal about Richmond, California, which is outside San Francisco, that has a huge Chevron plant. And while the unincorporated area of Richmond is the most exposed, you can't keep the pollution from moving. So we are all living under the same sky of pollution, whether or not we're segregated in neighborhoods.
Right. So it's the obverse of we live apart in our neighborhoods, but we really live together once you get up, 100 feet, and it's the environment, or 100 feet down, because that's where the garbage in those neighborhoods is put. She starts
just look at how we are getting the ash residue from the fires in the western part of the country in the Northeast.
Right.
No.
We
can't build anything that will keep that from getting here.
Well, didn't we go through this 30 or 40 years ago with acid rain? We don't seem to learn our lesson. One of the questions she asks right at the outset is, why is my country, she asks, refusing to heed the alarms that are being set off, the environmental alarms? And we'll talk about this some more, but the answer she starts to sketch out is that the biggest polluters are the biggest corporations, and they have the biggest power. And we, on the other hand, us well-meaning environmentalists of every stripe, are splintered into dozens and dozens of environmental groups, which together would make a great power base. But even then, it doesn't equal what the corporations have.
Well, and she also makes the point that it is systemic racism that has gotten us to this place. The people who have won the zero-sum game are the white-led corporations. And they've managed to convince a lot of white folks that, the structures that create the economy and create wealth in the United States are dependent on these hierarchies, and that those hierarchies have to stay in place, which means we can't do anything to change the system, or the economy will come crashing down.
Or anyway, they think.
Yes, they
think that's the big distinction, is that they're operating under this I don't know if you want to call it illusion, or I think she speaks of it as denial. But it occurred to me at a certain point in reading this chapter that what she's reporting and what she's observing commenting about in the white elite is what I would call the way we make a pact with the devil, a devil's bargain, where you, not a pact with the devil, but you make a devil's bargain, which is you get all that you can now of the good life, quote unquote, and you postpone the cost. And you'll face the, you'll pay the piper at the end of the at the end of the planet. So that devil's bargain has got to be a big part of the mentality of the white elite, and they're just going to postpone. One thing that interested me too, that I hadn't thought of, is that the white environmental leaders are not seeing the untapped resource for organizing in the Black community, in the communities of color, because yes, they do have the most to lose. They are losing big time in this climate crisis. They are potentially a great resource for a wider demographic and a bigger demographic platform. But that was a very good point. And I don't know where the environmental groups are on this. Environmental justice is all about the way the different ethnicities are unjustly paying the biggest price, and going to pay the biggest price in this crisis. So I'm not aware exactly of where that stands. But back to your point, the white elite says, well, we don't want to disturb the economy for this.
Well, and that's one of the things that I thought was really interesting. I'm trying to find it here, where she talks about, that the economy, like you learn in economics class, is the sum total of our population's consumption, goods and services. And that's the economy that the climate change isn't real people participate in. And she made this point that I thought was really interesting. The economy that they were referring to was their economy, the economic condition of people like them, seen through the lens of a zero-sum system of hierarchy that taught them to fear any hint of redistribution. Value-neutral admonitions about protecting the economy allowed these folks to protect their own status, while resting easy knowing that they were not at all racist, because it wasn't about race. It was about, well, the economy.
Yeah.
That's a huge piece, I think we all have to overcome.
Well,
why my earplug staying today?
There's no question that the economy is going to be dislocated significantly if the adjustments are made through legislation that we would like to see. And what I can't for the life of me see is why the petroleum companies haven't seen this coming and get on the side of environmental investments themselves and diversify. I mean, that's one of the principles of all entrepreneurial businesses, and to get ahead and be ready for the next market. But they're not doing it, and or they say they are. If you watch the TV commercials,
I was going to say, if you watch their commercials, they are, but they're not.
No, they're not. But listen, a learning for me was to see that our own United Church of Christ was featured in this chapter as having initiated the environmental justice movement back in 1982. Now, I've known about Ben Chavis's work in the past. I've lost sight of him lately. But here it turns out that in 1982, he led a movement in North Carolina somewhere. Do I have that right?
I think so. I don't remember the place.
Where they started to organize against the dumping of waste in these these neighborhoods of color. And so she dates the environmental justice movement from that 1982 movement, which is great. And so the UCC has been active ever since. Of course, we have Jim Antal. I don't know if you've ever heard him speak, but
yes, I have.
Our former conference minister and executive of the then Massachusetts conference has been so outspoken, and he's published a book. So, and that's a name we want to be sure you hear and chase down his book, Jim Antal, Antal. And I have it on the shelf over there, but I can't see the title just now. I'll get that later. Well, listen, what more can we open up for folks about this chapter? I noted that in Richmond, they did succeed in developing a multiracial coalition against Chevron, but I don't know that I found to what effect they were able to organize against Chevron's refineries, which were significantly endangering everybody's health in that suburb.
They are still dealing with the fallout from it. I'm trying to find the spot where she talks about what they were able to. There was a big fire in 2012 that caused everybody in like a 50-mile radius to get sick. Let's see.
Well,
the coalition's most remarkable achievement was the election of the Green Party mayor, Gail McLaughlin.
Oh, okay, good.
A white woman who became a thorn in Chevron's side. Permits and programs that for decades sailed through approval suddenly met with more inquiry, investigations, hearings, and even lawsuits. When the company sought to create a $1 billion+ plant expansion for processing the heavier, higher sulfur crude oil that gas companies increasingly rely on, the coalition sued and won because Chevron had not provided enough information about the pollution impact.
Well, that's a victory.
That's a victory.
When you can put a stake in the ground and say no more.
Yep.
And
I'm trying to think. McGee argues that the progress in Richmond was the result of a community vision for remaking their economy. And she then goes on to talk about the model of that multiracial coalition and ties it to the Green New Deal framework, which came about again through groups working together across race. And she writes it this way: the Green New Deal framework itself represents the multiracial alliance, co-authored by a young Black woman policy wonk, Rihanna Gunn Wright, sponsored in Congress by a septuagenarian white liberal named Ed Markey and a 30-year-old Puerto Rican from the Bronx named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and forced into the political conversation by a young Indian American woman named Varishini Prakash, whose Sunrise Movement staged a sit-in in soon-to-be House Speaker's Nancy Pelosi's office. And she talks about what that image, some of linking arms around a shared vision of a sustainable, just transition from fossil fuels that guarantees economic security for all those who are suffering, whether they're asthmatic school kids of color or, yes, coal miners. That vision is popular with 59% of the population. multiracial coalitions and cities and states have won versions of the Green New Deal in California, New Mexico, New York, and Washington. So here is her visual representation of that, let's see, majoritarian, anti-racism, pro-democracy, multi-ethnic coalition and its power to pay off in solidarity dividends for different communities. And I think that's it's really helpful for us to have some real world examples of the solidarity dividend.
For sure, the solidarity dividend is real, and it's not just a wish or a hope on her part. I think maybe we should conclude for today and say a little bit about our next chapter and the conclusion. We're very close to the end of the book. The next chapter is called The Hidden Wound. And she's going to approach this subject from a spiritual point of view, actually, and has more books, of course, wonderful books to recommend. In fact, several of them from the 50s and 60s, one by Wendell Berry and another by James Baldwin. So there's a lot of rich stuff here, really wonderful. So any particular learnings here today? I'll share one, which was that during the reading, I realized there was an enemy that she hadn't mentioned, not that there was time or space to do so, but it occurred to me that, the environmental justice movement, the environmental movement itself was gaining an ally in the predicted running out of oil resources, which, 10 years ago, I think it was 10 or 12 years ago, there was a prediction that we had reached, certainly, I don't know what the phrase was, but had reached the point of running out of these resources. And therefore there was pressure to find alternatives. And that went away because the technology developed fracking and all kinds of, and more oil reserves, the ones that Trump opened up in the Arctic, which now Biden has closed again. So the pressure of running out of petroleum has been lost. So the rest of it has to be moral suasion and practical suasion, the solidarity dividend. Any particular closing learning you want to share, Elizabeth?
It just reinforces for me the way in which systemic racism is a factor in every conversation we have about every topic that faces the nation. And until we are able to, I will use a Christian word, until we are able to repent and to really work on creating that multicultural, pro-democracy, anti-racism, majoritarian coalition, we aren't going to get anything of real significance to change.
Yeah.
And, the first step for Christians, when we come to a place that requires us to re-examine our conscience and our actions, is to confess what we have so long ignored or have not seen. But the process of repentance is work. And it means that we have to be engaged in the struggle. It's not enough for us to just sit here and say, well, I'm sorry about the way racism affected things, and then go on with our lives. Wherever we are and whatever our context is, we are called to the work of anti-racism.
Well, that's a spiritual challenge that you've identified and that she focuses on in the next chapter. In fact, did I cut you off with a final thought?
That was what I was going to say.
All right. Well, everybody stay tuned. We'll come back in in no time at all, the way the weeks fly by, right? And we look forward to another talk. So long for now, Dr. Elizabeth.
Blessings all.
Bye.